Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's national call. We're going to give it just a minute for people to get logged on. Thank you for your patience. While we're waiting, if you want to introduce yourself with your name and where you're calling in from in the chat, that would be great. Otherwise, we'll get started in just 1 minute. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining today. While people are getting logged in, I welcome you to introduce yourself in the chat with your name and where you're calling from. And we'll get started in about 30 seconds. All right. Thanks everyone for joining. I think some folks are still logging in, but we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's national call on the HoUSed campaign for long-term solutions. I'm Brooke Shipwright, Manager of Field Organizing here at NLHC, and we're so glad that each of you could join us today. I'll provide a quick intro to what these calls are for anyone who's new here, then we'll jump right in to hear from our speakers. So the HoUSed campaign focuses on advancing anti-racist policies and the large-scale sustained investments and reforms necessary to ensure that renters with the lowest incomes have an affordable place to call home. Twice a month, we host these calls to hear from national, state, and local partners in this effort to advance these solutions and to share an update on our federal policy priorities and how you can take action. Each call we have advocates, social service providers, housing and homelessness shelter providers, and people directly impacted by our nation's affordable housing shortage. We have them join from across the country. So like I said, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat with where you're joining in from. And if you have questions for the speakers, please use the Q&A box feature. It's easier for us to follow the questions along there if in the Q&A box rather than the chat box, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can today. Just a reminder, a recording, recap, and resources discussed on today's call will all be available in our Friday e-newsletter called The Connection. So be sure to subscribe to NLHC's emails if you'd like to receive that. And then finally, before we get started, just a reminder to be respectful of one another when engaging through the chat box. This feature is intended for you all to make connections with one another, share ideas, and to build community. So let's dive in. Today, we're going to hear updates from HUD Special Policy Advisor Doug Rice about HUD's decision to expand the use of small area fair market rents, field updates from Pennsylvania and Alabama, NLHC policy updates from our very own Kim Johnson, policy manager at NLHC, and we'll close with next steps for advocacy. So let's turn now to our first speaker, Doug Rice, who is Senior Policy Advisor at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, who's going to discuss HUD's decision to expand the use of small area fair market rents. Doug, I'll turn it to you.
Hey everyone, very glad to be here today, and thanks so much to the coalition for inviting me. So I'm going to talk about this notice that HUD released on October 25th, expanding the designated small area fair market rent metros. But first, some background. I mean, just for one, I just want to make clear that this is just one of a series of actions that HUD has made over the last couple of years to expand housing choice and opportunity for families. And why is HUD focused on this? As you all know, there's a lot of strong evidence that neighborhoods matter a lot to family well-being and both health and children's long-term outcomes. And there's also a long history of federal, state, local policies that have underinvested in poor communities, as well as severely limited the opportunities of low and moderate income families, particularly Black and other families of color, to own or rent homes in communities, in other communities with more resources, quality schools, and so on. And so, small area fair market rents is one small policy that intends to address uh, this problem. HUD has been doing other things too. We're currently running a community choice demonstration at 9 sites around the country. It's going really well. Under this demonstration, housing authorities are providing very robust services and supports to families who are interested in using their voucher to locate in an opportunity area of their own choice. And we have more than, I think, more than 1,000 families already enrolled in the program in those sites. We're also working on a notice of funding for an additional $25 million in resources to allow housing authorities to provide mobility related services to the people they serve too. And we've been doing other things too that are helpful, but I'll leave it there. Just some background for those of you, I imagine many are familiar with small area fair market rents. For those who aren't, as most of you probably know, HUD sets fair market rents for every area of the country. Those, and that's by bedroom size. Those are pegged at the 40th percentile of rents for rent and utilities for standard quality units. They are set for very large areas, there's metro areas and non-metro counties. And so, for instance, for a two-bedroom apartment, there is one fair market rent set for an entire metro area. Um, and as you know, these fair market rents are used to set the maximum uh, subsidy for people using housing choice vouchers. It's also used for setting rent limits in other programs and for other purposes. For vouchers, regular fair market rents can have a major shortcoming because rents can vary a lot across a metro area. Using a metro-wide FMR means that a disproportionate share of the units that are affordable to voucher holders turn out to be in the low rent areas within that metro, which are more likely to suffer from disinvestment and lack of opportunities uh, available in other areas in the metro. And so small area fair market rents are intended to address this problem by basing rents on smaller areas, zip codes within each metro. And so a separate small area fair market rent for each bedroom size is set for each zip code. And this ensures that at least some units in nearly every zip code within a metro should be affordable to families with housing vouchers. So back in 2016, HUD issued a notice, which was then implemented in 2018, designating 24 metro areas to be areas where housing authorities administering the housing voucher program must use small area fair market rents. And those designations affected approximately 370,000 households using vouchers in those areas. There were HUD used a number of criteria in choosing these metros that must use small area fair market rents. The criteria had to do with things like the extent to which vouchers in use were concentrated in higher poverty areas, the extent to which rents vary across the metro, across zip codes, and the vacancy rates were also taken into account. There's been some amount of research done on small area fair market rents. There were a number of demonstration sites where researchers took a good look at the outcomes for families, the impact, and so on. HUD is also, in preparation for the latest notice, talked to several academic research groups that have studied um, the the impact of the existing for households in the existing 24 designated areas as well. Um, and I think the research across the board that we have is pretty consistent. It shows that small area fair market rents is intended do expand the availability of affordable units and in higher rent areas of a metro area. Uh, in addition, where small area fair market rents are implemented, families are much more likely to locate in lower poverty, higher opportunity areas. So, for instance, the analysis of demo sites found an 11 percentage point increase in the share of families that move to areas in the top quartile of the researchers' opportunity index, and that's a really big increase. They don't seem to have any effect on the success rates, so the rate at which families succeed in leasing up with a voucher, and that includes in both lower rent and higher rent areas. Researchers have also found reduced concentrations of families with vouchers in higher poverty areas. Now, there's some variation across metros, but as I said, the study findings are broadly consistent. Um, okay. Also, in preparation for this notice, HUD held a number of listening sessions around the country where we talked to housing authorities in existing designated areas, as well as some researchers, as well as some families that use vouchers in those areas. And I think we had a few main takeaways, I think, from uh, these listening sessions. Housing authorities were uh, believe that a longer implementation period is really important. In the 2016 rule, when it was implemented, for complicated reasons, housing authorities had only 3 months to implement small area fair market rents, which is clearly too short. Most we talked to indicated that 6 to 12 months would be more appropriate. Um, and also, I mean, there's clearly some work to do in implementing small area fair market rents. There have to be IT changes made, materials, training for staff, and a process of educating both tenants and landlords as well about the change. And HUD has tried to address all these concerns in the way we're rolling out this new notice and the policy. So to the notice. So this notice designates an additional 41 new metro areas as areas where housing authorities must use small area fair market rents. This covers an additional 440,000 families that are using housing vouchers, which this brings the total to 65 areas using small area fair market rents, with more than 800,000 families using vouchers in those areas, and that's more than 40% of all households using vouchers. So a really substantial increase. Housing authorities have over a year to make the change, implement it. They are not. The compliance deadline is January 1st of 2025, and HUD is doing basically everything we can think of to support agencies in making the transition. We are providing supplemental administrative fees for all agencies in these areas, as well as providing much beefed up technical assistance to agencies as well, in a variety of types of technical assistance. So we really are doing what we can think of to try to make this as smooth an implementation as possible. So that's the policy. In closing, I did want to just reference some resources that HUD has on its webpage about small area fair market rents. And that's what this first slide shows. This is our small area fair market rent resource page, and it includes a bunch of different resources, as I'll talk about here. Next slide, please. One thing that it has is a dashboard showing data on housing authorities and regions of the country where small area fair market rents are used. And this includes, I mean, currently, this includes the required areas from the 2016 rule, those 24 areas, which cover 192 housing authorities. But this housing authorities are also allowed and encouraged by HUD to adopt small area fair market rents on a voluntary basis, even if they are not in a mandatory area. And or alternatively, housing authorities can adopt a form of small area fair market rents only in some zip codes in the jurisdiction, which is what we call exception payment standards. And so the data here show the housing authorities that have, on a voluntary basis, who have adopted small area fair market rents as well, either in entirety or as exception payment standards. Next slide, please. And the page also has a bunch of other resources on small area fair market rents, including, of course, links to various regulations and so on, some fact sheets for tenants about small area fair market rents, which we hope is going to be helpful for tenants especially in the new mandatory designated areas, fact sheets for landlords, and some links to some of the existing research and reports at the bottom too. So I think we're going to have to add to this. There's some newer research that isn't shown there yet that we will add. And that's really all I have to say. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much, Doug. That was a really, really helpful overview. We have just a few questions for you. The first one is, how will this change help voucher holders in the new small area fair market rent areas utilize their vouchers?
Well, what it does is it expands the range of units that are available to them across the metro, across the PHA's jurisdiction. And so um, when it comes to types of neighborhoods, geographical range across the metro, it will expand the units available to them. In general, on a net basis, it typically does not increase the total net units available to the households because, the flip side of small area fair market rents is in lower rent zip codes. The small area fair market rent is a bit below the usual fair market rent, and so there is typically a reduction in units there, but a roughly proportional increase in available affordable units in the higher rent zip codes. As I said, the research to date shows it doesn't really affect success rates per se, so it doesn't affect the chances that families will lease up one way or the other. But as I said, it should affect the range of units available to people. I mean, we do think that it is important for housing authorities, to the extent that they can, with the resources they have, to provide support for families to successfully lease up. And HUD has taken some steps in this direction. Last year we expanded allowable use of voucher administrative fees to cover security deposit assistance and incentives for landlords, and there are a number of agencies that have shown interest in that, especially the security deposit assistance, and so we're hopeful that agencies will take advantage of that too in helping families to successfully lease up.
Yeah, that's really, really important. All those different tools working together to help families utilize their vouchers. The second question is, does this impact how much voucher holders will spend on rent?
So it depends. And, I think there's been a little bit of research done on this. Over the long term, it doesn't affect program costs significantly, according to the research we have. And that's because, while the availability of units in higher rent areas, and therefore the subsidy paid for those units, if families choose to lease in those areas, increases costs, there's roughly a proportional decrease in costs in lower rent areas where the small area fair market rent is below the fair market rent. However, housing authorities have the discretion to hold harmless existing tenants who are living in lower rent areas where the small area fair market rent is below the fair market rent. And in our view, this is a really important discretionary policy to ensure that families aren't displaced. Current families aren't displaced by this policy. But it is possible that if housing authorities hold harmless, say, all the families in lower rent areas, while they see an uptick in costs for families that are currently living in higher rent areas or move there soon, there could be some modest increase in costs over the short term. HUD is aware of this, and this is something we're going to be monitoring and make sure that housing authorities have enough resources to cover those costs.
Thanks, Doug. Another question is, are moving to work PHAs exempted from this requirement? And I think a related question maybe that you could lump together is it optional for housing authorities to use small area fair market rents who are not on the list? Do they need to get HUD approval first? So kind of looking at who's eligible and who can opt out.
Mm-hmm. So with respect to the last one, for agencies that are interested in voluntarily adopting small area fair market rents, um, the process differs a little bit depending on whether they want to opt in on fully, so adopt them in entirety, or just to use exception payment standards. And so some of those options do require HUD approval, but this is something that HUD is pretty keen on. So I don't think that's really a barrier. With respect to MTW agencies have discretion to seek waivers for from HUD to set their payment standards in accord with in all sorts of different kinds of schemes, rent schemes. And so it's not exactly the case that MTW agencies are exempted from the mandate, but they can come in and request a waiver through their MTW program to adopt a different set of standards that they think works best for them. And many of them do that.
Yeah. And last question, sort of related to that first piece as well. What would you recommend to maybe advocates who are wanting to encourage their housing authority to voluntarily adopt this? And what someone in the chat asked, what is the procedure for a voucher holder to request their PHA to use the small area fair market rent?
Uh, well, we always encourage housing authorities to, invite input from residents about their policies, and there's there are formal processes for that as part of their administrative plan. For advocates generally, I do think it's important for all sorts of stakeholders in a region to be in contact with our housing authorities about their policies, both to educate them about the needs in the community and help them understand how certain kinds of policies may be beneficial to addressing community needs, as well as to put them in touch with interested in partners who can provide resources for families or be helpful in other ways in helping housing authorities to achieve their goals. So, yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Doug. There are, a few other questions in the Q&A box that we didn't get to. If you have a second to stay on and
Sure.
talk or two, if not, no worries.
Got 5 minutes.
We really appreciate your time today and sharing your expertise on this. Thank you very much. So now we will turn to field updates. Sorry, just one second. Okay, let's turn now to updates from the field. First, we have Gail Schwartz, Associate Director of Policy and Programs at the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania, which is one of our state partners. She's going to share about their eviction prevention resources and information series. So Gail, I'll turn it to you.
Great, thank you. As Brooke said, Gail Schwartz, Associate Director of Policy and Programs with the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania. So we know that quality and affordable homes are scarce, and we need to help people keep them when they have them. And eviction was a crisis before the pandemic, and it's not going to stop with the end of the pandemic. What we are concerned about is that, with the end of the public health emergency and as we move beyond the global crisis, the risk is that communities will return to the status quo in which eviction prevention strategies were practically non-existent or simply not a priority. So we decided to create an information campaign to elevate the why and the how preventing eviction still matters post-pandemic. So over a period of 6 weeks, each week we explored into different areas of impact, shedding light on ongoing efforts in Pennsylvania to prevent evictions, how to replicate effective programs. We developed weekly videos and fact sheets and toolkits for creating programs, as well as other resources, all of which can be found on our also newly created eviction prevention resource library. Next slide. So in the first 3 weeks, we really focused on the why with videos and new fact sheets that explore the relationship between eviction and school stability, racial equity, and homelessness. We really wanted to show that we can set up kids for long-term success with eviction prevention. We can increase equity for Black and Brown households. And we can reduce homelessness by implementing proven strategies to help resolve landlord-tenant conflicts in mutually beneficial ways. Next slide. So for weeks 4 and 5, we really started to focus on the how. So we took a deep dive into the how, looking at how to define success and how to replicate proven models that help. Here at the Housing Alliance, we strongly recommend that interventions focus on situations where the landlord has already filed for an eviction. And that's because the situation is just so much more urgent. Also, in the vast majority of cases, if it gets as far as the judge deciding, then the judge more often than not decides in favor of the plaintiff, which is typically the landlord. What we have found is that what's the more favorable outcome is for both the landlord and the tenant is to have cases either withdrawn or settled. Cases can be withdrawn by the landlord at any point in the eviction process prior to the hearing, or the case can be entered in as settled by agreement, which is, something that happens between the tenant and the landlord. I think for us, what we see is that when cases are withdrawn and settled, it means that there was some sort of negotiation and some sort of resolution to the conflict, either before the court hearing or at the court hearing itself. But really what it is that both the landlord and tenant have come to an agreement and they have agency over that agreement, and it is not an outcome that is just being handed down to them by the judge. So we really focused on creating resources like toolkits on mediation. We had actually created a landlord-tenant mediation toolkit during the pandemic, and what we did is we updated it to the post-pandemic context. We created a new, we call it Eviction Prevention Plug and Play. This really highlights court-connected models of, expanded legal access and mediation programs. It has fact sheets on each of these programs. We talk about tenant outreach strategies. We have sample budgets and a chart of known resources at the federal and state level that can be used to fund these programs. So hopefully everything that you need to submit a grant application. We also, really focused on what tenants had to say about the program, re-releasing a fact sheet that we had done previously. on outcomes from eviction prevention programs in Chester County in Pennsylvania, as well as in the city of Reading. And then we also released a blog just on how do you even start talking to judges, because that can be a pretty intimidating conversation to start. So again, we are looking at how do you define success and how do you replicate what is going to work. Next slide. From there, coming actually later this week, we are going to be releasing a new report on eviction filings in Pennsylvania. We had done a report on eviction filings in Pennsylvania a couple of years ago. And so what we have now done is gotten more data from the administrative offices of the Pennsylvania courts. And we are now looking at eviction filings capturing a 5-year span, starting in July 1st, 2018, going through June 30th of this year. And, with this evaluation, we're really looking to understand how eviction filings and filing rates have changed over time, regions where we are seeing evictions concentrated, and comparing pre-pandemic, pandemic, and post-pandemic time periods. Next slide. So, with that, all of this is going to be in our new comprehensive resource library. We're pretty excited about this information. Once we get through our release of the report later this week, we are going to transition to keep this up to be a monthly information series, where we are going to continue to use the data that we have collected from the Administrative Office of Pennsylvania Courts to start to dive in deeper around, what's happening in counties where we're seeing the highest rates of filings and the highest numbers of filings, and also other trends that may be happening in case outcomes and judgments and things of that nature. So with that is our information series. We do have to give a special acknowledgement to the National Low Income Housing Coalition and the Erase Cohort Project. That support really helped us kind of focus our message and strengthen how we talk about these critical issues and advancing solutions that we know work through this information series. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Gail. What great work you all have done with the Erase cohort and ongoing in Pennsylvania. We have a few questions for you if you have a minute to stay on with us. We're seeing a lot of excitement in the chat and Q&A about it being a great resource. One question is, do you have any strategy to work with informal or out-of-court evictions?
Yeah, so I think that's a hard one to kind of figure out. I do know that, what we've heard from our partners in especially more rural areas is that they really are seeing more and more of the informal evictions. I think landlord-tenant mediation really is the ideal eviction prevention model, and in that it works just as well outside of the court as it does in the court. So I think, what we can do to expand those programs, but that's definitely a very, very hard area. I think one of the things that we want to think about, and we looked at this with our first report that we released, I think last year, maybe the year before, is, where are we seeing evictions concentrated, right? So if we know that there are, high filing rates in certain areas, we probably know that some informal evictions are also happening in those areas. We also know that certain groups are disproportionately impacted by eviction. We know that people of color are disproportionately impacted. We know immigrant communities are disproportionately impacted. We know communities where there's, a large number of female-headed households are also disproportionately impacted. So one thing that we're doing is we're updating our zip code filing map, where previously we had been able to look at and point out, highlight those zip codes that we're seeing the highest number of filings, and we also want to start to think about how we can do that. So when we know that there are certain things that leave people disproportionately likely to face eviction, we know that we can target resources there just because that's what we're seeing. And so even though it may not be showing up in the court data, I think we have a reasonable expectation to say, our immigrant communities are probably facing a lot of informal evictions, and we should, be targeting some resources in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. The next question is there any study into rental assistance? How do renters facing eviction in Pennsylvania access a social safety net to cover past due rent?
Yeah, so we most certainly looked at rental assistance in the past, and when we did 2 case studies into eviction prevention programs in Chester County and in Reading. And so that really looked at, the combination of rental assistance with expanded legal access. So we are continuing to look at that. And we'll continue to look at that as we see dwindling resources for emergency rental assistance. We're very much in a transition phase, especially in Pennsylvania. All 67 counties got some funding, and there was essentially 67 versions of the emergency rental assistance program. So there's still pockets where ERAP is available and places where it's not. So it really is, as we start to take a deeper dive into counties with high filings, we are going to have to explore what is the relationship of emergency rental assistance and, what we're seeing in the data.
Yeah, thank you. One question is in regards to landlords, which I know you have done a lot of work there in Pennsylvania on. Could you give an example of some success that you've seen in working with landlords through this eviction prevention work?
Yeah, I think one of the most remarkable successes that we have seen is the partnership that has formed between a mediation agency that was launched during the pandemic, Just Mediation Pittsburgh, and the Allegheny County Housing Authority, where essentially they have a deep collaborative partnership to ensure that all households that are behind on rent in their public housing properties go to mediation first. And they have gone pretty much a few years without having to file an eviction, because they just have started to really systematize mediation into their work. There's also another agency that was created during the pandemic to support this work, Rent Help PGH. So there is still some, braided funding for emergency rental assistance. But again, the collaborative partnership between these 3 organizations, where you have the landlord, you have the mediators, and then you have the housing navigators, right? Those resource navigators all working together to keep people stable. Because, once people lose a resource like public housing, there really is no place for them to go except into the homelessness system. So, really making sure that we preserve those housing opportunities. And also, and speaking with the leadership at the Housing Authority, and they're like, this is great for our bottom line, right? Like, this helps us. It helps us achieve our mission, but it also helps them in really balancing the books and, making sure people are connected to those resources, that they are collecting rent. So I think that's one of the great examples that we've seen with landlords.
That's awesome. Would love to, I'm sure many on this call would love to learn more and try to replicate that in their own communities, because I know that is a big win. One question, just to clarify, do you provide legal support for tenants in the process, or do tenants in mediation not need that?
So we are not the actual service provider, right? We're the Pennsylvania equivalent to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. So it really does depend on how the program is structured in the area. I do know where we do see mediation programs, some have been able to create partnerships with legal resources to, make sure tenants are educated about their rights and responsibilities prior to going into mediation, to get legal advice, and to also review agreements to make sure people aren't handing away their rights as part of the negotiations that take place during a mediation. So we've seen some very interesting collaborations between the legal community, the mediation community, and then service providers.
That's great. And just a reminder, I've seen a lot of questions in the chat for folks wanting to access these resources. We will be sure to share them out in our Friday newsletter called The Connection, recapping this call. But for those that are, you mentioned a couple of things that aren't yet out in the world just yet. So last question is, how can people be sure to access your coming report on eviction filings later this week in the coming eviction prevention series?
Well, you can always join our email distribution list. You can also follow us on social media. We do have a social media campaign that, times and announces all of these resources. And of course, everything is going to be updated to the webpage that I just put the link in the chat. And when you go to that webpage, there's a become a member button in the top right corner, and that's how you get on our newsletter list. And we hope you join.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Gail, for that overview and the great work that you all are doing there in Pennsylvania to prevent evictions. And yeah, thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you.
All right. Our other field update today is coming from Alabama. We have Tia Turner and Emma Steelman of Love Huntsville in Alabama. Both are co-founders of Love Huntsville. Emma is the executive co-founder, and Tia is also one of our fabulous interns here at NLHC, interning on the policy team. So Tia and Emma will be sharing about Love Huntsville's vote to prioritize housing in its fiscal year 2024 budget. So Tia and Emma, I'll turn it to you.
Hi, thank you so much for having us today. Like Brooke said, my name is Emma Steelman. I'm a co-founder of Love Huntsville, and I'm here with Tia Turner. Really appreciate y'all's time and letting us talk a little bit about what we've been doing. We're really excited about some of the news that's coming out of Huntsville. We're rather hopeful as well. There's two things we really want to talk to y'all about today that we're pretty pumped about. The first one is an amendment to an ordinance that just got voted on and approved a few weeks back, and that is going to help expand our community development department within our city and help mandate some programs that would focus on affordable housing and ending homelessness. And those plans will be taken seriously and implemented. So that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about today. The second thing we're going to be talking about today is something that our group has been spearheading directly and internally, which is a homelessness bill of rights. And we are really excited about that and looking forward to telling you a little bit more about it and why it is so necessary, not only in our city, but also in cities all across the country. So I'm going to turn it over to Tia, who is going to talk to you about the amendment for the ordinance, and then I'm going to follow after her and do the Bill of Rights.
you, Emma, for the introduction, and thank you, NLHC, for having us today. I'm really excited to talk about the ordinance. After doing a lot of advocacy, boots on the ground work, we started back in 2021. It was voting. It was an election year, and we got involved with a number of the camps trying to help them mobilize. And out of that, the camps that we were working with had started to get evicted. And many of them had been in the camps for decades. And the issue around homelessness and affordable housing was not being addressed in the city of Huntsville. And we, after building relationships with our unhoused folks, boots on the ground, we started doing these dinners. And out of that, going to the camps, building relationships, we kind of figured out that there was huge gaps within our city. So there was a lot of people being trespassed for camps, being cycled throughout our justice system, and Huntsville was building no affordable housing. And so how we got to the ordinance that was just passed back in September 28th, it was after a lot of boots on the ground work, listening to what our folks needed on the ground, and also, building relationships with our city council and other stakeholders within the city. And because of that, one of our Councilman Keith, he listened to us after a lot of just banging on his door saying, hey, this is what we need to focus on. He was able to get unanimously passed this new ordinance, which would actually put like a focus within affordable housing and housing for the unhoused. And it's written out perfectly, honestly, so that there's actionable steps that the city council will have to follow. So within that ordinance, they're hiring a full staff position under the community development department, and that staff person would spearhead all of our affordable housing efforts and housing for the unhoused. And they're going to be tasked to come up with a plan by June 13th of 2024. And that comprehensive plan that they come up with, it'll actually the city council will implement it in their fiscal year budget 2025. This is a huge step for Huntsville because for a long time, it's not been addressed. I think we've added since 2010, there's been 118,000 new residents in Huntsville, and I think only 40 housing units being built in between that time. And so we are at a deficit, and this is a really important step, and we've done a lot of hard work, and it's just really exciting to see us getting somewhere with the city, and the city actually acknowledging that this is a focus that we have to make a priority. And so that was a huge win for many of us advocates, and we're just excited for what's going to come out of that. There's going to be a national call for this staff position that they'll put out. And so it won't come from someone that's directly already connected to the city, which is a good thing. And so, that's a little bit about the ordinance. Really excited about that. And I'll pass it back to Emma.
Thank you, Tia. It is such exciting news. I know so many of y'all understand when you work really hard on something for so long, it's really exciting when you get a win. We're excited about the amendment to that ordinance. And as we're working on advocating for housing and trying to get all sorts of affordable housing units built in Huntsville, we wanted to do something that the community wanted in order to help protect people's rights and prioritize some things that the community wanted. So we polled residents at some of our largest unhoused encampments in Huntsville, and we kind of floated the idea of doing a homelessness bill of rights. And we kind of put out a little survey, a questionnaire with all the different rights that we would think would be good to have on this bill. And then we went and asked the community if that's something that they wanted, and if they thought that their life would be impacted by a push like that. And over 90% of people did vote that, yes, we do want something like a Bill of Rights. So in the late half of this year, we decided to focus on that while we continue to do all of our other work, like doing our camp dinners and advocating for housing. We've been working really hard to put together a Bill of Rights, which we are really excited about. It's going to prioritize things like access to water and electricity and bathrooms 24/7. It's going to hopefully allow people to not be forced to assimilate into programs where they can be removed from family members and medical equipment. It's going to have anti-discrimination pieces as well, which are really key when our city is expanding at such a rapid rate. We're seeing a lot of hostile architecture and a lot of hostile policies being implemented as our city grows. So having something like a homelessness Bill of Rights is really crucial to making sure that people's rights are protected as the city continues to grow. So yeah, we're really excited about that. As Tia said, our group really started because there were back-to-back major evictions in Huntsville at our largest encampments. And it's really devastating to see community being ripped apart over and over and over again. And while we cannot stop every single eviction, even though we do try, having something like a Bill of Rights would help protect people in the meantime until we can secure housing, which I think is really crucial and really important. And a Bill of Rights is only, I believe, in 5 states currently, but is something that we have been hearing and seeing other cities talk about and communities express interest in wanting. So we're excited to be doing that here in Huntsville, and I hope that more cities attempt to do something like that as well. But yeah, that's all I have today, unless you have anything else. Our emails are on the screen, and you can also follow us on love.huntsville at Instagram, and lovehsv.org is our website.
Thank you so much, Tia and Emma. What an exciting win. People in the chat box and Q&A box are celebrating with you and congratulating you for this really exciting win. Really a testament to all of the hard work you've put in through the years to get to this point. So congrats. One question is, if you have a moment actually for a couple of questions, we have a few that have come in. One person says, I'm a former public defender in the Tuscaloosa area. Their housing was less of an issue than municipal laws that essentially criminalize being unhoused. For example, they criminalize littering and permissive trespass statuses. Is the problem with that sort of thing present in Huntsville to any degree?
Yes. Go ahead, Emma.
We both are like, yes, absolutely. Also, I should have been clear, the Bill of Rights we're hoping to propose within the next few months. I forgot to put that in my original statement. And yes, a decriminalization of homelessness is huge in our Bill of Rights as well. We see a lot of people being arrested and getting records and tickets for quote unquote littering just for living on the streets. We see people getting arrested at camps, and the city is calling it trespassing. We see a lot of unnecessary harassment and targeting of unhoused individuals. And so that is something that we're hoping to start tackling within this bill. Tia can talk a little bit more about it if you have anything to say, Tia, but that is a huge issue that we see here as well.
Yeah, just as Emma was saying, because there is no housing, affordable housing, it's really hard for, especially when camps are being closed or even just encampment life in general. You see a lot of trespassing for what we deal with in Huntsville City. It could be law enforcement simply not liking someone, or someone having extra litter around their encampment, and they'll trespass them from the actual encampment site. When we see these different tactics going on in Huntsville a lot. And so one of the things that we have been kind of working on trying to figure out is, like, we have been working on with one of our municipal court judges, which is an important role, especially when you have people cycling the justice system because of unhoused issues, citations like trespassing, littering, things like that, loitering. And one of the things that we've seen, and this is kind of something that we've been trying to work out, and it could be really a really great model. But one of our municipal court judges, she has different programs, jail diversion programs within her court. And she started to put a focus on the unhoused community, because she started to see so many of our unhoused people cycling throughout her court system, in her courtroom. And because of that, one of the things that we have been kind of working on, trying to help her figure out in a way that maybe if we can solidify like a program, a jail diversion program, she kind of gave us some incentives that she would kind of, take away warrants if we could get people into court and things like that. And it's a program that's actually still being built, and she's kind of had like a test run to see how it was going to go, and also connecting those individuals to different services that are directly connected to housing and things like that. There's some insufficiencies there, but it could be a great program with more intentionality. And so it's just a lot of different things that we see in the Homelessness Bill of Rights. It would really prevent some of those interactions, especially within the camps, from things that we see going on in the camps with law enforcement and also the residents that live in the camp.
Thank you both. That's really helpful. We have someone from the Huntsville area who put a question in the Q&A. They say they're from the 35806 zip code, which is in the top 20 in the country for zip codes adding new housing units. And they're wondering if that substantial increase in housing supply of West Huntsville has helped in your cause.
Well, the biggest thing that we are seeing, there's a lack, honestly, with the focus on the extremely low incomers. So that's kind of the people that we deal with. And so we're not seeing many homes being built for those who are in the 30% or below AMI. And so not really.
Unfortunately, we had just a few years ago, the 20,000 housing unit shortage of just average income. And so a lot of the new housing is like exciting and great for people who are blessed enough to have that income level. But as Tia said, there's so many people who live in Huntsville that live below that poverty line, and there's not been hardly any affordable housing being built. So that housing is good to count towards the negative housing that we did need for all the new jobs coming into Huntsville, but it doesn't actually take care for a lot of the people who are already living in Huntsville and who are slipping through the cracks as cost of living continues to rise.
Yeah, absolutely. Our data very much underscores that exact issue with the greatest shortage being with extremely low incomes. So let's see, one question is, how are you working with local politicians to get this homelessness bill of rights introduced and then, or maybe developed, maybe it's still very preliminary?
Yeah, so it's still, we've already spoken with one of our council members, the Councilman Keith, who we've kind of built a relationship with, that once we've kind of iron shut our just our research portion, getting other stakeholders that we have this kind of intersects with our work, getting their eyes laid on it. We kind of have the bill drafted, but want to make sure that we have other people weigh in to make sure we're not missing anything. But we've already started to kind of put the word out to our council member Keith, to let him know, since he's already kind of taken on the affordable housing, starting to champion that, kind of get him in the sense of like, hey, this is already what we're working on. He actually mentioned to us that he was getting ready to create an ordinance that would prevent those individuals from being cited from living in parked vehicles or sleeping in their parked vehicles and things like that. So it was kind of like a perfect segue into what we were already working on. And we've had quite the journey with our council members, and the dynamic of politics in Huntsville is supposed to be nonpartisan, but because of where Huntsville is located, you get a lot of pushback and stigmas on what affordable housing actually looks like, and actually addressing unhoused issues. And so it's just really taken us to really just kind of beat down the door, really just getting so many other people involved, getting other advocates within the city involved, going to city council, raising awareness. Back last year, because of those efforts, one of our council members hosted the Huntsville City's first ever governmental panel about unhoused issues within Huntsville. And so that was like a really great start to address it, because like I said, for decades, it's just been a thing, like we're not going to address it. Huntsville City didn't really have a plan for the growth that we've experienced. They're just now kind of getting on the route of addressing affordable housing. And so it really just has taken us to really just beat down the door, say, hey, we want to show up. We want to talk about zoning laws, different things like that, just being at the table at city council meetings and things like that. That's really kind of given us a foot in the doorway to be able to have access to council members to talk about what the community needs.
That's awesome. Really great organizing and advocacy work to get that ready and through the door. Last question is, I know the Bill of Rights isn't quite ready yet, but where can people get a copy of the ordinance and the Bill of Rights once it's ready?
Yeah, we can give out resources. I can send it for our slides. Our ordinance would be on Huntsville City's website page, and so we can put a link to that as well.
Great, that would be awesome. Well, thank you, Emma and Tia, so much for your time today, and for the really great work you're doing there in Huntsville. It's really exciting.
Thank you all for having us.
All right, last but not least, we have our very own Kim Johnson, Policy Manager here at NLHC, to share the latest and greatest from Capitol Hill.
Thanks so much, Brooke. Latest is true, although greatest is maybe not the most apt description. But hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Kim Johnson, Policy Manager here at NLHC, and I'm going to provide just a quick update on where things are on Capitol Hill. If you do not subscribe to our newsletter, here is a copy of our most recent Hill update in our memo to members, where you can find all of the most recent information on what's going on with HUD appropriations on Capitol Hill. So last week, the Senate passed their FY24 spending bill for HUD programs. The spending bill would provide about a 13% increase to HUD, which is good, but still insufficient to renew the cost of renewing all existing housing vouchers. To make clear, and as our colleague Sonia Acosta from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities pointed out during our last national call, that does not mean people who currently receive vouchers will lose their voucher. It does mean, though, that when a family no longer needs a voucher, rather than that voucher going to a new family in need, it would just expire. And so that would represent some backsliding on a lot of the progress that we've made recently on expanding the availability of housing vouchers for people with the lowest incomes. And so that's where the Senate is. They passed that bill. We are going to continue pushing for increased funding in any final FY24 spending bill. Over in the House, as I'm sure folks are aware, we have a new speaker, Speaker Mike Johnson, no relation. But he is just beginning his second full week of serving as the new Speaker of the House. We are also working against a deadline for the current continuing resolution that only goes until November 17th, which is just 11 short days away. And so Speaker Johnson has his work cut out for him in getting another continuing resolution squared away on top of passing all 12 appropriations bills. Well, the House has already passed 6, but they want to pass all 12 before that November 17th deadline. They were supposed to consider the funding bill for HUD last week, but those negotiations got held up. after some House Republicans realized how much funding was going to be cut from Amtrak and from the transportation side of the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development bill. So that has been delayed until at least today. We don't anticipate a vote on that bill until tomorrow. We are also paying attention to a number of problematic amendments to the House HUD bill that would slash funding for HUD programs, that would impose needless barriers like work reporting requirements on HUD, and that would, impose other paternalistic provisions on tenants of HUD programs, all of which we, of course, oppose. And so we are continuing to ask advocates to weigh in with their members, to urge them to reject, to oppose any amendments that would slash funding to HUD or impose any of those needless barriers. And we're asking for them to continue to call on Congress to provide the funding that is needed to fully renew all housing choice vouchers, to ensure that public housing operations and administrative accounts get the full funding that they need, and to ensure that funding remains in any final bill for HUD's eviction prevention grant programs, which provides legal assistance to people facing eviction, and to provide increased funding for tribal housing. My colleagues have dropped some links, so you do not have to remember all of the words that I just said to you in order to weigh in with your members of Congress. We have an easy peasy call-in. We have an easy way of emailing your members of Congress as well at our Take Action Center. So please do continue to weigh in. Folks are doing an amazing job with maintaining that funding. Just as a quick little recap, at the beginning of this appropriations process, we were really fearing funding slashes of up to 30% to HUD programs. That didn't happen, and that is because of the work that people like the advocates on this call put into making sure that we saw increased funding at a time when countless other programs were seeing really steep funding slashes. So thank you all so much for your continued work and your continued advocacy. Yeah, and I think that is about it from me. Stay tuned. We are going to continue keeping an eye on all things FY24 appropriations as this process goes on. So I'll turn it back over to you, Brooke.
Thanks, Kim. One question for you. I'm not seeing a whole lot of questions, so you must have covered it really well. But one question we get regularly on the field team when we're, a process is drawn out like this, and we're asking folks to continue reaching out to their members of Congress about the same issue over and over. What would you say to folks about the importance of doing this more than once and keeping that drum beating throughout this really long federal appropriations process?
Yeah, absolutely. And first, just to acknowledge, there is, burnout and advocacy fatigue are real. I do think, though, that it is important to continue showing up and continue asking. Closed mouths don't get fed, squeaky wheels don't get greased. As long as people are showing up and demanding their members provide that increased funding, you are making a difference. And you're making a difference in the lives of millions of people who rely on those HUD funds to have a safe place to call home, to keep a roof over their heads, to help find a place to call home. And so the work that you're doing is repetitive and frustrating, and I understand that, and it is still very important.
Well said. One other question that did just come in. If the House passes their HUD bill with the problematic amendments that you mentioned, will there be a chance they will be stripped when they get to the Senate? Yeah,
that is a great question. So for kind of next steps and what we're looking for in process, once the House passes their bill with or without those problematic amendments, the House and Senate are going to have to reconcile the two versions of their bills. Now, what we're looking at is the House bill that was crafted with solely Republican input, that is very, very one-sided, that enacts a lot of these really dangerous cuts to a lot of programs that we care about, and that underfunds, of course, housing choice vouchers and a lot of our other priorities. What we're looking at over in the Senate is a much better bill, still insufficient funding for housing vouchers, but still better funding overall across the board. And we're not looking at any problematic amendments that would strip funding or anything like that. And that bill has been passed with bipartisan support. It passed last week by a vote of 82 to 15. And so the Senate is really going into these negotiations with a strong upper hand. And so what we're really going to be pushing for and what we're really hoping to see is that the Senate ultimately wins out in those negotiations with the House, and that we see bills enacted with funding levels that reflect the Senate spending bills, if not something more.
Well, thank you, Kim. I'm seeing no other questions. So thank you for joining today's call and sharing that really helpful update. Hopefully we will have good news at the next call on the 20th. And with that, seeing no other questions, I'll go ahead and close out the call. Just a reminder that the recording, resources shared today, and a recap will be available in Friday's e-newsletter called The Connection, which will recap it each week, recaps the week's news from NLHC. So be sure to sign up for our emails if you haven't already. And yeah, please keep calling your members of Congress and writing to them and about the importance of the policy priorities that Kim mentioned. And thank you all for your advocacy. Thanks again for joining today, and we look forward to seeing you on the next call. Take care.